Hello and welcome to News Center. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Donald Trump gets set to hike India tariffs substantially for buying Russian oil. This even as India has hit back, calling it unfair and unreasonable. India has denied Trump's charge that Delhi was fueling Moscow's war machine, instead asserting that it was the United States which had encouraged oil imports from Russia in the first place. And in the midst of all of this, Prime Minister Modi is scheduled to fly down to Beijing for the SCO meeting later this month. This would be his first visit to the country post the Galwan clash in 2020. As India and China attempt to improve ties, Trump's tariffs loom large. Speaking to CNBC yesterday, President Trump said, and I quote, "I think I'm going to raise India's tariffs substantially in the next 24 hours, end of quote. The US has already imposed a 25% tariff on imports from India, which is scheduled to take effect tomorrow. He was also vowed to impose additional penalties on India without divulging any details. Responding to the US President's threats, the Ministry of External Affairs has promised to take all necessary measures to safeguard national interests and economic security. India said it began importing from Russia because traditional supplies were diverted to Europe after the Ukraine war. In fact, India went on to say the US is actively encouraging imports of Russia oil by India as it strengthened global energy market stability. Meanwhile, India has called out both the US and the European Union for continuing to trade with Russia. In a statement by the External Affairs Ministry, India said US has been importing uranium hexafluoride for its nuclear industry and palladium for its EV industry, along with fertilizers from Russia. President Trump was asked about this today. He responded saying he does not know and will check and get back.
India says that the US imports Russian uranium, chemicals, fertilizers, while criticizing their energy imports. Your response to that, sir?
I don't know anything about it. I'd have to check, but we'll get back to you on that. Yeah, please.
Now, as Donald Trump threatened India with action due to high purchases of Russian oil, several economies, including European Union, have not been able to decouple from Russia completely. As per data from CREA, EU has paid Russia over $100 billion for gas imports since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. European Union's payments for Russian imports were approximately 75% of the 2024 Russian military budget. EU's LNG imports from Russia were up more than 67% since the first quarter of 2021, while EU imports of Russian gas are down 70% in first quarter of 2025 versus quarter one of 2021. Now, these were not due to sanctions, but because of payment issues and infrastructure damage. Europe is also clearly struggling to decouple from Russian gas due to long-term contracts running till 2040 and the failure to attain sufficient non-Russia gas supply overall. EU has reduced trade with Russia, but as of 2024, the two-way trade was approximately $78 billion. This is less than $68.7 billion worth of trade between India and Russia. EU imports in 2024 were $41.5 billion and were dominated by fuel and mining products. European Union's trade with Russia has fallen sharply in 2025, but imports were still over $10 billion in the first quarter of this year. So who are the biggest buyers of Russian exports since December 2022 till June 2025? For coal, China was the highest at 44% of Russia's coal being bought by China, followed by India at 19% and Turkey at 11%. If you speak about crude oil, China was the biggest buyer, topping the list at 47%, followed by India at 38% and EU at 6%. For LNG, European Union was the leader of the pack, coming in at 51% of the purchases from Russia, followed by China at 21%, Japan at 18%. Now, let's put the spotlight on fossil fuel exports from Russia overall. Now, Russia earned 922 billion euros in revenue from fossil fuel exports since February 2022. EU purchased more than 212 billion euros worth of these exports. China is the biggest buyer of Russian fossil fuels, followed by India. But these are not the only two countries. More than 10 nations, including European Union, Turkey, Brazil, Singapore, Hungary and South Korea were also buyers. To take this discussion forward, I'm now joined by former Foreign Secretary Shashank and former Indian Ambassador to WTO, Anjali Prasad. Also on the show with us is Ajay Sahai, Director General and CEO at the Federation of Indian Export Organizations. Mr. Sahai, if I can ask you first, what's been the current estimate analysis of the hit that exporters are going to face starting this month with a 25% tariff and penalty which could take the tariffs anywhere upwards of 35%?
In fact, we have not been able to quantify how much is the loss because we are not sure of how much will be the exact duty. He keeps on shifting the goalposts. I'm not sure whether on account of penalties he will impose 10% duty or 15% duty. As an industry, we only look forward to two things. One is the clarity, other is the stability. Once he announces the duty, we will have at least the clarity in place. I'm not sure of the stability because 3 weeks, 2 weeks down the line, he can come with any levy on account of the fact that India is part of the BRICS. So that kind of challenges will remain. But fact of the matter is, even with 25% duty in some of the sectors, we will be definitely taking a hit because many of our competitors are at a lower duty, and probably from that perspective, unless the industry comes forward to absorb that much of duty, it will not be able to get the business. As of now, all orders are on hold because industry is not in position to calculate how much is the duty which they have to absorb.
All right, let me now go across to Ambassador Shashank at this point. Ambassador Shashank, why do you think the United States is targeting India in this manner? Donald Trump warning yesterday that in 24 hours he'll substantially raise tariffs because India's purchase of Russian oil. Now, we've been looking at statistics which are so openly available. European Union is the biggest buyer of LNG when it comes to Russia. China, Brazil, Singapore, South Korea, European Union, Turkey, all these are countries which are big buyers of fossil fuel exports coming in from Russia. So why just target India in this manner?
Well, I can only guess that while all these other countries are buying Russian energy and other resources, they can say they need it for their own economy. In India's case, what President Trump has been saying that India is not only buying it for itself, but it is also making money out of it. But at the same time, then he says that, well, India is making money out of this deal by reprocessing the crude oil and selling it to others, including USA. But he says that this money is somehow fueling the Russia-Ukraine war, so which is somewhat difficult to understand, because if India is making the money, then how is that is fueling the war? I mean, unless he says that there is a direct link and India is transferring either weapons or some other equipment to Russia to fight the Ukraine war out of these additional earnings which India is having. Second point is that other countries have made commitments to USA, but on the basis that they will either invest money or they will accept American imports with certain duty-free access to their markets, and they will be willing to pay. But then who will pay? That is not very clear, and how much investments and how long will it take for making those investments? Because these are things which are not really based on detailed investigations, detailed negotiations, but only on the basis of commitments made at the highest levels. Now, President Trump seems to be keen that the similar thing should be done by the Indians. But, you know, Indian system is a little different. Here, I don't think the Prime Minister would go and start negotiating the deals directly on all the percentages, etc. So I think there is a bit of a mismatch as far as, because President Trump takes the decision on his own, though it is quite likely that he has a team of advisors who are telling him that the Indians are not playing ball. The American economy is doing extremely well, and the more you be tough on India, the American economy will do much better. Second point I would say is that India was willing to go along with the Americans to a great extent, but ever since Pakistan carried out terrorist activities in India, and then we found that the Americans were supporting Pakistan in many ways, and they have apparently decided that Pakistan and China would be their major partners in whatever they do in future. So India feels that, well, America has certain other targets in mind. Third and fourth, I would say that partnership with Russia, partnership with the BRICS, that's an ongoing process for a very long time. And if you remember, I mean, you have all been saying that this has been done for a long period. Other countries are also buying it, and it has kept the markets stable. And India is not going out of its way to de-dollarize. India is only trying to use its own currency for exchanges where dollars are not involved.
Right. Perhaps it's also a mix of factors that are angering Donald Trump. Of course, he wanted India to acknowledge Donald Trump's role in stopping the India-Pakistan war. Then, of course, there is the BRICS issue. There are multiple factors possibly which could be making Donald Trump angry. But Ms. Anjali Prasad, to get you in at this point, we have been saying throughout that India should stand its ground. We should not compromise our national interest. But now we're reaching a situation whereby we are perhaps getting isolated. Our tariffs at this level of 25% are higher than other South Asian economies. Is there now some time for compromise, some change in strategy to give some victories to Donald Trump?
Thank you, Parikshit. Now, the question that I have is, what compromise? Compromise on what? The point is that as I see this whole thing unfolding over the last month or so, I get the feeling that a game of brinkmanship is going on here. Donald Trump actually is pushing us, probably, and that's my reading, on the so-called bilateral deal. The Russian oil imports are a pressure point, definitely, but and the BRICS is a pressure point that he is using. But we are a sovereign country, just like the US. We don't have to listen to what President Trump is saying. We are going to look at our own national interests, as the government has been saying, and the MEA has said so in the last line of their press release. So we should continue to look at our national interests. And this bilateral deal, I can tell you for sure, if we bow down to all his demands on agriculture, dairy, all this will stop. But we can't do that because that is just not in our national interest. They will dump, I'm sorry to say, subsidized imports into India. The US subsidies per farmer, according to an estimate, are roughly $7,000 as compared to just $48 per farmer by India. So look at the difference. Now, if they start dumping these subsidized... Yes.
Ms. Prasad, if I were to ask you, if you look at certain protections that India has for its farmers, for its agriculture and dairy sectors, how do they compare to protections that US has for its own agricultural sector? How does it compare to countries such as those in Europe, those in South Asia?
Parikshit, see, this is a very technical kind of question that you've asked me, but I'll try and make it as simple as I can. First of all, I want to say that the US may say whatever it wants to in the multilateral forum, but the fact is, as I just quoted the data, they give huge subsidies to their farmers. What does that do? That means they have a lot of production, they have large-scale farms, and we are competing with them, our subsistence farmers who own less than 2.5 acres of land per farmer are going to compete with them. How? That is one. Now look at the European Union. Their entire agriculture tariff, if you see, is a non-tariff barrier in itself. They use what are called compound, mixed, and complex tariffs. We can't even read those tariffs. I mean, our farmers can't even read those tariffs. Most of them are what are called non-ad valorem tariffs. And therefore, the tariff itself is a non-tariff barrier. So we can't export very much of agri-products into the EU anyway.
Right.
So for us,
right. That's a very important point, ma'am.
Yeah, for us, agriculture.
We have to protect us. We have to protect our market because we will not get entry into US and Europe, as you're pointing out, ma'am. Let me also get in Mr. Ajay Sahai back again. Mr. Sahai, how worried are you about a trade deal not happening at this juncture? as Ms. Prasad is pointing out, and Shyam Saran has also said, our former Foreign Secretary, that we should not be compromising on our national interest. But when it comes to India's exports, as an exporters body, how worried are you about the possibility of the trade relations going down, the larger US-India relationship going down?
In fact, if you look into perspective, my current export to US of the goods is to the tune of close to $90 billion. Roughly 45% of that is not affected by the reciprocal tariff, that is under Section 232. As of now, we are not worried about that, though of course he has talked about 200% tariff on pharma. Once it comes, definitely that will be a cause of concern. Currently, roughly $47 to $48 billion of India's export is at stake. We feel that roughly 40-45% will continue, or probably the exporter will somehow manage. They are in some of the segment where they have the tailor-made product, probably the margins will be there. The problem will be roughly around $20 to $25 billion exports. Some of that can be absorbed by the domestic economy. And in the worst scenario, we should be ready to take a hit on the balance of that. Over a period of time, in medium to long-term range, probably we will be diversifying into the new market. The FTA opportunity provided by the countries like UK, maybe early harvest with EU, will provide some cushion. So in the short term, definitely we should be ready to have some pain. But after all, when the government takes a call in the national interest, someone has to sacrifice those.
Right. I'd also like to ask you one more question, Mr. Sahai, before I go back to Ambassador Shashank. The question would be, now, the US is saying, and Donald Trump is saying, India is not just purchasing Russian oil, but refining it and selling it to other countries, making huge profits. There is also an allegation of India diverting dual-use goods to Russia. As somebody who tracks export lines, how true would this estimate be? How much are we really making by exporting petroleum products using Russian crude to other countries?
In fact, if you look into the US sanction, was not on trading in oil with Russia. It was trading on oil beyond $60 a barrel. That was the OFAC sanction. Probably we have not violated that sanction. Now he is raising the issue, why are dealing with Russia? But at the same time, it has been made very clear that looking into the challenges in the Middle East, had India, or to that extent China, has not imported the crude from Russia, the global prices may have moved up. Coming back to the issue of SCOMET item, please bear in mind that SCOMET items are generally exported by large and medium-sized companies. They already have their exposure in US and EU, and therefore they are the most reluctant to trade with Russia. Whatever little trade is happening with Russia is either in respect of pharma or agriculture by the mid-sized and large-sized company, or to some extent by the smaller company. I have not come across any case except the one which was, of course, investigated, and finally it was found that there was no violation of the SCOMET. I have not come across any instance where Indian companies have exported to Russia violating the SCOMET.
All right. Let me put the final question now to Ambassador Shashank. Ambassador Shashank, what can India do now to clinch this deal? Can we remain isolated? Can we be the only country not to have a deal and have high tariffs?
No, we should try to find out what President Trump has in mind with regard to our membership of BRICS and our partnership with Russia. Because as far as Russia is concerned, I think it's really President Trump feels that President Putin was his great friend, and suddenly he finds that President Putin is not playing ball with him, and he's unhappy on that score. So somehow he's taking it out on India. I hope that President Putin and President Trump can improve their relations, then this problem will go away. So that is our only hope as regards Russia is concerned. On BRICS, we have been telling them that, look, we will not be able to completely do away with dollars, and therefore we are not taking part. Russia can do that because Russia is under sanctions. China can do that because Chinese currency is so popular all over, and they are manufacturing center for the whole world. So therefore, I think all these things we have to keep in mind, but we should be prepared. I would not say to reciprocate, but I would say that we should adhere to our own interests, but at the same time be ready to negotiate with them and be ready for higher tariffs, because this has been the situation in America in the wake of the Second World War. And I think President Trump has been going back to the same old philosophy that by raising tariffs, you can somehow improve your balance of trade. He may not succeed, but at least he's trying to do that. So we just have to go along with it, try to find alternative markets. We have our own big markets. But at the same time, we should also try to see that whatever technical collaboration takes place. Yes.
Right. You know, there's a lot at stake when it comes to the India-US relationship. Do you feel that the relationship now is getting damaged for at least the next decade? How would you compare this to the time when India carried out nuclear tests and there was pressure of sanctions at that time?
No, I would say that we worked meticulously, but in a slow manner over 20 years to improve our relations with the Americans. As far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan was created by America and UK at the end of the Second World War in order to put pressure on countries like China, Russia, India, and Iran. And they have been successful in that, and Pakistan has been playing that role. So therefore, there is a lack of parity between what Pakistan does and India does. So I think we will always have this problem in our relations with the USA, that Pakistan would be willing to do much more with the Americans, and India will have to protect its large mass base. You know, we have 1.4 billion people in the country, and we cannot just say that, all right, we will forget about their interests and allow the prices of oil and so this energy to go up to $130, $140 per barrel. So I think that will not be very fair for the Indian people. And in fact, the previous government in USA was quite clear that they wanted stability in the oil prices in the world. And therefore, they were saying that, all right, there should be a ceiling on the prices, and India should be able to buy with that, and that they actually encouraged India to keep buying that oil.
All right, so we've run out of time. Let's see what happens. President Trump has announced that he will be imposing substantially high tariffs on India, and around 2 a.m. India time tomorrow, that is in about 8 or 9 hours from now, he is going to be making an announcement in the White House. Let's see what that is all about. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Center. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.